But a couple quick announcements. One is that this lecture this evening is in conjunction with our special exhibition on Megiddo. If you haven't seen it, please don't forget to take the time. The exhibition will be on until March 15, so it's on for a little bit longer, and it's a fantastic exhibition. There are also a number of other events that are happening, particularly later this month. One on translating the end of times, art, science, and the media of apocalypse, which will be a cross-disciplinary conversation on January 22nd. So look for the announcements or reminders of this. That will happen on the 22nd, and Kirsten Newman, our curator of the exhibition, will be organizing and co-hosting that. We also have a book talk, The Grave Robber with Tim Carpenter. This is scheduled for January 28th. Again, look for reminders on those two upcoming events. So this evening, the last announcement is just to remind you that we have, after the lecture, a chance to move into our next door into our orientation area for reception, and also for the opportunity to ask our speaker to sign copies of his new book, in case you might have brought one of those with you. We've been selling some of them also. I've been told they're going like hotcakes off the souk. There's only a few copies left, and I'm told this is true. This is not a marketing ploy. If you still hope to get a copy, there's a few left. You might want to get there quickly if you have any hopes of having Eric sign it before he heads home tomorrow. So on that note, let me introduce our speaker, Eric, who is professor of classics, history, and anthropology at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Eric is a very distinguished scholar, and if I can say anything about him, he represents, in my mind, in our discipline, that rare scholar who brings together a very high level of scholarship in archaeological research, particularly in the Bronze and Iron Ages of the Eastern Mediterranean or the Levant, but also has been able to convey that to a public or broader audience through a remarkable set of publications. I think the fact that we have such a wonderful turnout here this evening is an indicator of just how successful Eric has been in this kind of more public scholarship. It's resulted in more than 20 books, both very academic, excavation report dense like publications, but also publications that some of you have seen and probably read, like the 1177 BC, which was, if we can have anything like a bestseller in our business, definitely was a bestseller. I don't know how many copies it sold, and has also received many awards. Eric has published and been involved in co-authoring literally hundreds of articles. He's presented hundreds of lectures at academic conferences, at public events like these. He has a remarkable and highly productive scholarship that has spanned many decades. He was a student starting out at Dartmouth, went through Yale to earn eventually his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania before taking up his academic appointments, which now, as I said, is as a full professor at George Washington, where he has been chair of the department there for many years, and also now currently is the director of the center that they have, the archaeology center there. So a remarkable breadth and depth of scholarship. And with many awards, he's held fellowships that is a long list that I won't take the time to work through. And his books have won many different awards, numerous awards over the years. So I think that's where I will leave it. Oh my goodness. The last comment, since I think maybe this is a reminder for me not to talk so long, but anyway, I do want to say, just in terms of some of these books, there is also a strong Isaac or Institute or connection here that is really also important to note for us from our own community. Just two of those 20 plus books, one, The Battle of Armageddon, and then more recently, The Digging Up of Armageddon, two books, if you haven't read, that are really outstanding publications, also award-winning, and that deal specifically with Megiddo and also with the archives, and worked from our own archives here at the Institute. So we have, in many ways, you are kind of part of our community, whether you accept it or not, Eric. And so it's on that note that I want to welcome you and ask if everyone would help join me in welcoming Eric to give his lecture on Speaking to the King, My Lord and My Sun God, Love, War, and Diplomacy in Canaan during the Amarna Age. Eric, please.
Wonderful, and thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be back. It's actually really wonderful to be back. This is my favorite place to be. It's also the most nerve-wracking for me. I mean, we're here in Breasted Hall. We're here at the vaunted halls of this university. And there are people in this audience that could be giving this talk instead of me. And then there are others who have never heard of these things. So I'm going to try and walk kind of a fine line tonight, trying to satisfy both groups and probably satisfying neither. But you'll let me know that. But thank you, Tim, for that wonderful introduction. And I've actually always used Breasted kind of my model, because he was the one that said you need to be public facing as well as with your colleagues and all of that. So that is what I've tried to do. And what I'm going to do tonight, with your permission, is talk to you about a project that it was a selfish project. I did it for myself. I wanted to write this book. I didn't even tell my publisher I was writing it until it was done. And then I said, by the way, I've got a book, you want it? But I wrote this just because I love the Amarna letters. I first started studying them in graduate school, and I had a one-on-one with Earl Lichty. It was just me and him across the desk. And we would just sit and translate Amarna letters for the 3 or 4 hours. I was terrible, but he was very patient with me, and it kind of instilled a love for them. And so I always thought that I wanted to do something about them. And then I realized that while people have done stuff with the Amarna letters, that nobody had really written anything about translating them and the race to translate. You know, there have been books on the race to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics, been books on translating the race for Linear B, and so on. But there hadn't been anybody that, to my knowledge, in book form, there have been some scholars and articles who did wonderful work, but in book form, to take a look at the translation. So I thought what I would do in this book that I wanted to write was do half of the race to translate, and then half, what did the tablets actually say? And so I had actually written the book like that with the two halves. And then I started reading it, and I went, wow, this is boring, and it bogs down. This is not good. And so then I started playing around with it, and I ended up moving the sections around. So when you read the book, and I do hope that you will like it now, and it was worth the money that you just spent, you will see there's a section on the translation, and then it jumps to a part of what some of them say, like the royal letters, and then it goes back to the race, and then it goes back to what's in them. So I was trying to keep the momentum going there. So if you get to the end of a section and you're like, wait, I want more, don't worry, in about 20 pages, there'll be more, right? So that's the way it is set up, so be aware of that. Now, that's not really going to work for this talk tonight, so I've gone back to the original format, and I'm going to start out with telling you about the discovery and the letters, and then a quick view of the race to translate. I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but give you a sense of where everybody was coming from, and then we will turn to the royal letters and the vassal letters. So we'll get to everything, but it might take us a little bit of time. But Kirsten has told me I've got 3 hours, no more, no less. So we're good, right. And the other thing that I wanted to do, and if you haven't seen it already, go next door, go see the Megiddo exhibit that she put together with the help of the whole museum team. It is absolutely superb there. And I've tried to tie this lecture in to the exhibit. It'll be pretty obvious because I'll say the word Megiddo, and you will realize that. So this is part and parcel, and I want to thank everybody for bringing me here as part of this exhibit, which is absolutely wonderful. So without further ado, let me jump in and take you back to my favorite period of history, but put it into context. So you all remember back in 1922, when Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb, all right, and the discovery just rocked the known world. It prompted Egyptomania, et cetera, and it still continues to this day. I mean, the people now going to the brand new GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum, all the King Tut stuff is now out on display. It's supposed to be amazing. So that was in 1922. 3 years later, you guys, University of Chicago, began digging at Megiddo, and its finds absolutely also rocked the known world, and they continued to do so not only until 1939 when the digging ended, but they still rock it today. And these are images that are from the exhibition that's just next door. Now, if I take you back about 35 years earlier than that, that was when the Amarna letters were found in Egypt at a place that we call, in modern terms, Tel el-Amarna. And those rocked not the general world, but the academic world. And they still continue to be of interest today. People are still working on them. So what we're going to do in this time period is take a deep dive into a very small period of time. It's only about 30 years that this archive covers, but for me, it's the high point of the Late Bronze Age. And some of you who know me well, including students, et cetera, know that if I could be reincarnated backwards, I'd want to live back then, right? I would probably not be alive for more than about 48 hours, but it would be a fun 48 hours. And the people that I want to meet are pretty much from the time period that we're going to talk about. So Late Bronze Age, we're talking Egyptian New Kingdom, but we're going to focus in specifically tonight on Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, because these are the two that are responsible for the Amarna archives. And if I could, again, be reincarnated backwards, I would want to meet Amenhotep III. In fact, more than I want to meet Akhenaten. I also want to meet Shuppi-Lulliuma of the Hittites, mostly to find out if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, right? Right, so this is where we're going to be tonight. We're in the middle of the 14th century BCE. So we're going to take you back about 3,400 years. All right, now, the Amarna letters, and you're looking at one of the tablets here, they're mostly about palm size. Some, though, are as large as like 1.5 feet tall. There's one that was like 0.5 meter, but most of them are palm size. Now, they are said, the story goes that they were found by a local woman living around Amarna, which is like halfway between Cairo and Luxor, that she was looking for fertilizer in the ancient ruins. And that's actually a pretty good place to get fertilizer where humans have lived. Now, the problem is that woman who supposedly found the tablets and did not know how much they were worth and sold them for pennies on a dollar to somebody who did know what they were worth and sold it for 60 times that amount. And so she can never be found. And I don't think she ever existed. I think she was made up. She was made up by the antiquities dealer who was actually doing the illegal excavations, right? So it's like when you're looking for a lost sheep or a lost goat and you happen to find a tomb when you're in fact a tomb robber and you were looking for it in the first place. Right, so I'm not sure that this woman ever existed. Nobody ever found her later, but that is the story that we were told, that she was looking for fertilizer. There's about 350 letters in that archive. They belong to Amenhotep III and Akhenaten. They're either from them or to them, but there's also another 20 or 30 tablets that are school exercises and various other things. And it does look like that there was a scribal school that was in that same building. But we're going to focus in on these 350 letters, and we're going to go through them one by one by one, which is why I need 3 hours. Okay, so there are, within these 350 letters, 50 of them are from the great kings, the G8, as I call them. King of Mitanni, king of Assyria, king of Babylonia, king of the Hittites, king of Cyprus, and so on. There's about 50 of those great royal letters. The other 300 are from the minor kings, the vassals in Canaan. that owed allegiance to the Egyptians. So we'll go through one set and then the other. But they were all found at Amarna, which was Akhenaten's capital city, along with all the revolutions that he did in religion and art and everything else. He also established a brand new capital city. When he died, which was not that much later, that capital city was abandoned and the court moved back down to Luxor. So this is like every archaeologist's dream. It's basically a one-period site. You go and you dig and you know where you are. And in fact, the excavations are still ongoing today, right? There's still a British excavation that is digging there. But I've got the circle around what we think is the records office and where this archive probably came from. Now, other people came and dug as well. You may have heard of William M.F. Petrie. He's got the best name in antiquity or for archaeologists. He dug there in the early 1890s, and the Griffith Institute at the University of Oxford put his journals online so you can read them for yourself if you want. But what I like especially is when he was there in 1892, he had a young helper, 17 years old, a kid by the name of Howard Carter. So Carter dug with Petrie at Amarna, and this is what Petrie put into his journal. Mr. Carter is a good-natured lad whose interest is entirely in painting and natural history. He only takes this digging, being on the spot and convenient to Mr. Amherst, and it is of no use for me to work him up as an excavator. This was exactly 30 years before Carter found King Tut's tomb. So I think not an auspicious start, but it ended well for him. So, all right. So what are in these letters, and what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, everything that you see on this map basically shows up in the letters. We learned about the royal marriages. We learned about the dowries. We learned about diplomacy and intrigue, the gifts and the request, and we know to whom the letters are being sent and from whom they are coming. So we've got names. I mean, this is how we write the history books. We've got Ashur-uballit from Assyria, Kadash-Menenlil Bernaboriash of Babylon. There we go, my guy, Shuppi-Ludiuma of the Hittites, Tushratta from Mitanni, Tarhun-Doradu of Artsua. He, by the way, has the hardest name to pronounce. I will tell you that right now. And then from Ugarit on the coast of North Syria, Amastamru and Nikmadu. So these are the royal correspondents, but we also know the names of the vassal rulers in Canaan with whom the pharaohs were in contact. So we've got Abdi-Heba of Jerusalem. We've got Rib-Hadda in Byblos. We also know the names of the messengers and the diplomats that are linking these kings to each other. But we also, and this is where it gets really interesting, we know the names of the troublemakers that are there. In particular, a guy named Biridiya, who was the mayor of Damascus, and a guy named Aziru of Amuru, who's up in northern Syria. And we will come back to all of these. Now, the sad news is that because these were found and excavated illegally, immediately went onto the antiquities market, they are now split. They're in 14 different museums. They're in 8 different countries. They're in 10 different cities. They're on 4 different continents. So Germany's got the most. Germany's got 202 of them. Then the British Museum in England and Oxford and a couple others, 119. Egypt's got only 52 left to it. And then France, Russia, the US, Turkey, and Belgium have others as well. So this is, I think, one of the most egregious cases of looting and things being split up. And I would love to see them reconstituted at some point all together, maybe in the new Grand Egyptian Museum, but we'll see. All right. And what's even more interesting is that these might only be a part of the original archive, because when Tutankhamun moved everything back down to Luxor, they probably packed up the active part of the archive, the cases that were still open, and moved that. So I think that what we've got in the archive here is the stuff that was just, it was done. And they said, we don't need that, you don't need to move it, just leave it there. All right. So I think there's another part of the archive still to be found, but we need to go down to the area of Luxor to find it. So that may explain why we've got so few letters in here from some of the rulers where you would have thought there'd be more. Okay, now keeping an eye on my time, I don't have to count the first 20 minutes, right? Yeah, okay, good. Just checking, right. Okay, so let me take a quick spin through the race to translate, which involves 2 British scholars and about 5 German scholars. The 2 British scholars you've probably already heard of. One is Wallace Budge, who's on the right, the Egyptologist that everybody loves to hate. And then A.H. Sayce, Archibald Henry Sayce, one of the most respected Assyriologists around. And since these tablets are written using cuneiform and Akkadian, which is the diplomatic language at the time, you needed an Assyriologist and an Egyptologist, basically, though Budge also knew Assyriology. So it's kind of like in Ben Franklin's day, the diplomatic language was French, right? So back then, the diplomatic language was Akkadian. So if you were the Hittite king, your scribes could do Hittite and Akkadian. If you were Egyptian, it would be Egyptian and Akkadian. If you were living in Mesopotamia, you were lucky because you just needed to know Akkadian, right? So that is why, even though these were found in Egypt, they are not written in Egyptian hieroglyphics or hieratic or anything like that. They're written in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system. And that is in part why they caused so much confusion when they were first found. People thought they were fake because they had never seen anything like this in Egypt before. So let me give you the first-person narrative. Here's Sayce showing up in February, which is when he published. He actually showed up in January of 1888. As far as we can tell, the tablets were definitely found by about November 87. That's the first mention that we've got by other people. But some of the entries in the museum at the time, the museum in Cairo was called the Bulaq Museum, and some of the entries record as earlier as May 1987, the first couple trickling in. But definitely everything was by November 87. Sayce shows up in January 88, so he's missed the initial deluge. And so he writes, and he's publishing this in the Academy, which is a newspaper in London. Since my arrival in Cairo, I've learned that about 200 cuneiform tablets have been offered for sale here. Some have been bought by the Bulaq Museum, the larger number by this individual, Daninos Pasha. I have not seen a specimen of them, cannot therefore say what age or class of cuneiform writing they belong to. If they really have been discovered in Upper Egypt, their interest will be great. And then a month or two later, in April, he followed up, publishing in the same place, and he says, aha, I can now identify them. They are all from the time period of Nebuchadnezzar, 6th century BC. And he says it's definitely written in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. No. He was off by what, 700, 800 years, something like that? Yeah, but it was a nice try. On the other hand, Budge, who was there in time, he got there in November 87, in his autobiography, which you're looking at here in 1920, he said, before I'd been in Cairo many hours, I found everybody was talking about the discoveries which had been made in Upper Egypt. Most extraordinary stories were afloat. Everybody was sending their representatives from the major museums. So he went down to Luxor, and he was sitting in the house of an antiquities dealer. And he tells us that at first he was brought 6 tablets, and that he was sitting in the darkened room by candlelight reading them because the director of antiquities was on the warpath because he knew about these tablets. How did the director of antiquities know about the tablets? One of the antiquities dealers had a very large tablet, supposedly, in his jacket, concealed in his jacket. And as he stepped up into the train, or perhaps down from the train, it's not clear, the tablet fell out of his jacket and shattered on the train platform. This is like one of the big ones. This is 1.5 feet tall. So I presume he picked up the pieces because there's only 2 that are that big. But that came to the attention of the director of antiquities. And so he issued a blanket statement to all of the inspectors, go out and seize as many of the tablets as you can from all the antiquities dealers. So when Budge went down to Luxor, he went into the antiquities dealer house with the shades drawn and a candle going so that the inspectors wouldn't see him. And this is what he says he saw. He was examining a half dozen tablets, we're about halfway down, when another man came in with 76 more, some of them quite large. On the largest and best written of the second lot, I was able to make out the words, Ana ni'ib mu'ariya, and on the others, Ana ni'im mu'riya, shar matu mit itzri. And he says, this was obviously 2 different kings, and I realized I was looking at the letters, and I'm like, great, interesting, no way, I do not believe that. You are not sitting there reading this by candlelight and reading exactly this. I mean, maybe he was, but I doubt it. So this is him writing in 1920. But he did figure it out very, very, very quickly, because after he had sent the 82 that he promptly bought on the spot to the British Museum, by June he had published some of them. And he recognized that they were not from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which he mentions in his article, but they were from the time of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten. So Budge got right on it and was pretty accurate, which I think is interesting since he was the Egyptologist and Sayce was the Assyriologist, but it was Budge that was getting it right. And so in his article in June 1888, which is like not even really a year after they were found, he is actually giving us a little bit of a summation of what was in each of the tablets. Sayce, in the meantime, merrily went along his way making inaccurate identifications. So he agreed that, okay, they were from the time of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, but still Moses was mentioned in there. And 100 years before we had ever expected him to do that. In another tablet, he's announced that Solomon was in there. And so it becomes clear that Sayce was looking for biblical figures in there. And when I suddenly realized this was the exact same time that Henry Layard was digging at Nineveh and Nimrod and everything else and was finding the various first millennium kings, the Neo-Assyrian kings, that very much Sayce wanted to find the same things. But so he's looking biblical, but they're not in there. So he came out actually with an article in the exact same issue as Budge's, and he has agreed, okay, they're Babylonian tablets and others, but he then has a little bit of a problem. Again, he's agreeing that he was wrong with his initial dating, and now they're back in the 14th century or so, and we're very good with that, and he actually tells us where some of them are from. I know this is too small to read, but he's saying some of the letters are from Byblos, Megiddo, Akko, Ashkelon, and he was correct about that, but he got things wrong. So this is his article where he's got about 13 tablets. And for instance, I just show you tablet number 11, and you can see my red box around the reverse, right? These tablets are written on both sides. And so he had translated the front, the obverse of one, and then the back, the reverse of the other. The only problem is you can see the reverse starts, to the king, my lord, my son God, I speak, Rib-Hadda, your servant. This is not the reverse. This is the front. This is the beginning lines. He had it backwards, and I was like, oh my God, how could you get it backwards? And then I put myself in his shoes. I'm like, I wouldn't have known what was front and what was back either until I realized there was a pattern that they all started with, to the king say this. But still, he didn't know this yet, so he published the reverse as the obverse. And then the other one I just give you, I don't want to belabor him too much, though I do come down pretty harshly on him in the book. Here's another one, tablet 8, where he said, he translated it as, "To the king of the land of Egypt, my son, I speak, the king of the land of Elashia, thy son towards me is at peace. For the family of," and there's the name of a guy, Kaus-Ikid, "for he killed openly the king of the country of Akapisuka?" Never heard of this, but okay. "And against 2/3 of your country exceedingly he approached." All right, that's what he thought it said. We now know it says, "To the king of Egypt, my brother, message of the king of Elashia, which is Cyprus, your brother, for me all goes well, for you may all go well, for your household, your wives, your sons, your horses, your chariots, and your country may all go well." I think you will agree it's a completely different translation, right? Okay, but again, look, this was early days. And in fact, the other thing to keep in mind is that cuneiform had really only been deciphered 30 years earlier. There was a great challenge in 1857 where this had just been excavated, and the British Museum gave it to 4 scholars and said, "What's it say?" And there was this challenge to see if they had deciphered cuneiform properly and could translate it. The 4 participants were rather famous: Rawlinson, Hinks, Opert, and Fox Talbot. And what each of them did was translate it, put their translation into a sealed envelope, gave it to the secretary of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. He opened them up, compared them. They were all pretty much identical. There were, some problems here and there, but everybody agreed that cuneiform had been successfully deciphered. And the really cool thing is the article that came out has all 4 names on it, which is neat. But this was exactly 30 years before the Amarna tablets were found. So I can't hit on these people too much because they were, it was beginning. So it's kind of fun, but they got rescued, though, by a group of 5 young Berlin scholars. And so I name them in the book, I give them the nickname of the Young Berliners, because they're all in Berlin, and they are all young. They're in their 20s and 30s at the most. There was a senior scholar or 2 helping them, but basically these are 3 of them right here. So Ehrman, actually, on the left was one of the senior guys, or he was young. Schrader was the old guy. What happened was, while Sayce and Budge were trying to mess with the translations, the Germans just went full tilt, in part because their agent had bought 160 tablets. So they had a huge corpus to work with. And so this co-authoring is by an Assyriologist and an Egyptologist. And they just went right to the heart of it. And you can see on the bottom right in German, they're the ones that said, hey, it's Amenhotep III and Akhenaten. And then both Sayce and Budge went, oh, you're right. So the Germans are right out in front. The one that really surprised me, I would say if anything surprised me in writing the book, it was the role of Hugo Winkler. I had always known Winkler in graduate school as the guy who excavated at Hattusa, the capital city of the Hittites, and found the archive there, which led to the decipherment of Hittite. He started the excavations in 1906. Hittites deciphered by 1916. Winkler actually had died like a year or 2 earlier at the age of 50. But I always knew Winkler as a Hittite guy. Did not realize in his earlier career, he was like one of the main guys responsible for the Amarna letters. So you see here 3 of his publications from 1888 and 1889. And he is the guy that initially arranged the letters in the way that we still look at them today. He gave a preliminary catalog, he summarized them. He is the one that split the tablets into 2 groups, the great kings and the vassal kings. He arranged them geographically, so all the letters to and from Babylonia, and then Assyria, and then Arzawa, Cyprus, and Mitanni, and then you had the vassal ones. So Winkler is the guy that did this. It's the first attempt, and by and large, it's what we still do today. And he did this within 2 years of the archive being found. So for me, that was the big surprise, was the role that Winkler played, because I had never seen that written anywhere. And he, working with Abel, who did the drawings, came out in 1889 to 90 with all of the tablets that were in Berlin and in Cairo. They didn't do any translation, they didn't do any transcription, they just gave drawings and photographs of the actual pictures, with the idea being, I mean, today we would call it open access, right? Here they are, here's the go at it. Everybody that knows Akkadian, you can now translate it. And they put them all out right away. And you know it, again, it's within 3 years of them being found. Well, Budge decided that they had to come out with theirs at the British Museum also, but he enlisted the help of Karl Betzold, who actually is another one of the young Berliners, but was at the British Museum at the time. And the two of them put out everything that Budge had bought way back when. And here they did pretty much the same thing. They put out a drawing and they put out the photographs. So the British Museum ones came out about 2 years later. So by 1892, everything was out, all within 5 years. But that wasn't enough for Winkler. What Winkler wanted to do was to actually translate them. And so he did something very unusual. 1896, he comes out simultaneously in German and in English with the translation, where he's got on the left the transliteration, where he's putting the Akkadian into the sounds, and then on the right, the actual translation. And he did this for the Berlin and British museums, but not for Cairo. And I do not know why he didn't include Cairo, but they're not in there. It remained until 1915, when Knudsen put all of them in. So Knudsen then updated what Winkler had done and included Cairo. And that's what people were using from 1915 on for quite a while. It was the same sort of thing with transliteration on one side, translation on the other. Since then, we've come a long way, and very quickly. Bill Moran of Harvard came out with his translation in 1992. Rainey in 2015 published posthumously with the help of Bill Schniedewind and Rainey's widow. And then now Jake Lauinger and Tyler Yoder are working on the newest translations. They've come out with the Vassal correspondence already, which is in hardback, published by Billie Jean and her Lockwood Press, but it's also up on the web, free, for open access. And they tell me they are now working on the royal letters as well. So there's lots out there if you want to read all of this. And then there are supplementary studies as well, where they've actually looked at the petrography of the tablets and tried to figure out where they were made and all of that. And then now the newest thing is looking at the actual language in there, because it's not just Akkadian, it's Canaanite Akkadian, which is a whole dialect unto itself, and it's got its own various things. And so we've got a couple of things that have been out for a while, but the next one is going to be Alice Mandel's book, which will come out any day now, basically. All right, so that is a quick trot through the race to translate. There's far more detail in the book, but you get the idea. So what do they actually say? Let me go through very quickly, and no, I'm not going to go one by one by one by one. I'm going to give you some of the highlights. So the royal letters, as I already mentioned, they're concerned mostly with the marriages and the dowries and diplomacy, the intrigue. Sorry about that. My alarm. But we started late, right? Again, as I always ask, you don't all have Indiana Jones on your phone? It's just, I may be dating myself now, but yes, so I'm aware we're at 8 o'clock right now. So, okay. So I already mentioned some of these royal correspondence that we've got, and we know most of their dates here. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew Amenhotep III and Akhenaten are right there in the middle, but we're basically from 1390s or 1380s down to about 1334 or so. There may be a letter to King Tut, but not sure. Everything else is Amenhotep III and Akhenaten. So we can actually track these, but keep in mind, we are told that when the tablets were first found and were being transported, like to Cairo and down to Luxor, as they were banging against each other in the donkey saddlebags, they were breaking. And I believe it was Sayce that thinks there may be at least a third of them that were destroyed. So we've got 350. There may have been 500 at one point, 600, and they're just gone. So I would say, all right, we've got 2 letters from Kadesh and Enlil, 1 letter from Burna Boreash. There may have originally been more, right? Same thing with Mitanni, though Tushratta does send 8 letters. They must have been really sick of him, right? Another letter from him, right? But he is the one that also writes to Queen T, and there is a fragment in the gallery of part of that letter. Arzawa on the western coast of Anatolia, we've got 2 letters there, and then Ugarit, we've got a couple as well. So Amenhotep III starts it off, but Akhenaten continues, writing to the same places. But the thing that we figure out is that every time there's a new king on one of those thrones, he has to reestablish ties with the Egyptian pharaoh. So we get letters where it actually says, my grandfather and your grandfather were friends. So too were your father and my father. Thus you and I should be friends. And they actually give the names of the grandfather and the father, which is in part how we can reconstruct our history. I just mentioned the one that's now next door on display. It's got its own nice little display case. This is a letter that Tushratta of Mitanni, which is in North Syria, or what is today North Syria, he writes to Queen Ti'i, who is the widow of Amenhotep III and the mother of Akhenaten. And in this letter, he is realizing that she is the transition. So he talks about how he was good friends with Amenhotep III and is going to be good friends with Akhenaten, but in the meantime, he wants to make sure that they are friends as well. And in fact, this particular fragment is just one part of a much larger tablet. This fragment was over at the Art Institute for quite a while, I think 1894 to 1916, something like that, right? And then in 1972, John Brinkman realized that it matched with the British Museum one, and now we know what we've got here. So you've got part of the fragment of one of them. So in these, they're talking mostly about diplomatic alliances, and this is one of the examples. Again, Tushratta, who writes so many, talks about, since you were friendly with my father, now you should be friendly with me. And he says, I herewith send you 1 chariot, 2 horses, 1 male attendant, 1 female attendant. These are gifts. These are greeting gifts. And every time they write to each other, they send a gift, right? I've got a letter, I've got a message, I've got a request. And in the meantime, here, have a horse or 2 and a chariot as well, right? So some of these tablets are just concerned with the gifts that are being given. And then towards the end, they will say, so I've given you all this. I don't really want much, but if you feel like sending me something, I could use X, Y, and Z, right? And you know they were keeping track of this. We do it today as well, right? And so Tushratta is writing here, but some of them were probably fairly unique. This may have been the dowry, because Tushratta sent his daughter to marry Amenhotep III. And so line after line after line, these are all gifts that are being sent. But basically, what we're looking at is gift giving. And anthropologists have studied this, that if you're not related to somebody, but you want to work with them, you can sometimes claim that they're family, that you're brothers, that you're sisters, that you're mothers, daughters, whatever. And these guys are doing this. So we've got, for example, one letter. It's not in the Amarna archive, but here's a letter from Ugarit. My brother, look, I and you, we are brothers, sons of a single man, we are brothers. Why should we not be on good terms with each other? Whatever desire you will write to me, I will satisfy it, and you will satisfy my desires. We form a unit. So basically, they're not trading. Trading is what merchants do. That's beneath them. They're giving gifts, but it better match. And we do the same, right? You give somebody something for a birthday or Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, and if you don't get something back that's about equivalent in value, you don't forget, do you? Yeah, so they're doing the same thing back then. But not everybody liked this idea of being related. Here's a letter from one of the Hittite kings to the Pharaoh of Egypt. He says, "Why should I write to you in terms of brotherhood? Are we sons of the same mother? I don't think so." Right? So not everybody liked this all that much. But they then were related to each other because along with the treaties, they would marry each other's daughters. And so when you're talking about my father and my son, it could be a sign of respect, with the older person being my father, even if they're not really the father. But if you married their daughter, they were in fact your father-in-law. So maybe they were the father. So this is one way to get around this. So a number of these royal letters are concerned with marriage negotiations. And indeed, this is one of the letters with the guy all the way out on the western coast of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. It's south of Troy, but it's that same general region. And we know that Amenhotep III is negotiating to marry this guy's daughter. And in fact, if we plot all the marriages of Amenhotep III, he marries people from Babylonia, from Mitanni, from Artsawa. And if you notice, Hatti, the Hittites, it's kind of right in the middle there. I think he was trying to ring the Hittites with people that he was allied with and marrying their daughters. I can't prove that, but it does, I think, kind of make sense in a way. And then Akhenaten continued it, married the daughter in Babylonia, also another daughter, Mitanni. I think there's something like 3 Babylonian princesses and 3 Mitannian princesses, all in the Egyptian harem at one time. And in fact, we do have one letter in which the foreign ruler writes and says, "You're asking for my daughter, but my sister is already there." And then you can see him pause, and he goes, "Has anybody actually seen her recently? Is she still alive?" And I think it's Amenhotep III writes back and says, "Well, you need to send people who know her. Otherwise, who's going to know?" And I'm reading this going, you don't know if she's alive or not? A simple yes or no. Is my sister alive? A, yes. B, no. Instead, he's like, "Why don't you send people who know her?" And I'm thinking, he doesn't know who she is. He has no clue. So it's a very large harem. So anyway, so it's interesting getting a little peek into all of this. But the big thing that they're also all asking for from Egypt, everyone else wants gold, right? And Egypt is the main provider of it. They control the mines down in Nubia and Sudan. And so here is one very good example, the new kid on the block, Ashur-uballit, king of Assyria. And he writes, but he knows how to do it. "I'm sending you as your greeting gift a beautiful royal chariot outfitted for me, and 2 white horses also outfitted for me. 1 chariot not outfitted, and a seal of genuine lapis lazuli. Is such a present like that of a great king? I think so. Gold in your country is like dirt. One simply gathers it up. Why are you so sparing of it? I'm engaged in building a new palace. Send me as much gold as is needed." All right, that's what they're all writing. This is what they're asking for. Kadesh Enlil of Babylon, same thing. "Moreover, you, my brother, as to the gold I wrote you about, send me whatever is on hand, as much as possible, before your messenger comes to me right now in all haste." And then there's the kicker. "If during this summer you send the gold I wrote you about, I'll give you my daughter." And Amenhotep III writes back, like, what kind of a guy are you? He writes, "It's a fine thing you give your daughters in order to acquire a nugget of gold." And then he says, "But okay." And he sends the gold, and he sends the daughter, and everybody's happy. I don't know how the daughter felt, but so we get this again. It's either marriage or it's gold or it's both, basically. The problem is there were problems with the gold. We get a letter, this one from Kadashman Enlil. You've sent me, he says to Amenhotep III, you've sent me as my greeting gift the only thing in 6 years, not that I'm complaining, but the only thing in 6 years, 30 minas of gold that look like silver. What's going on? This does not seem to be unique. Biridiya, king of Babylon. Certainly my brother did not check the earlier shipment of gold that my brother sent to me. When I put the 40 minas of gold that were brought to me into a kiln, not even 10 minas appeared. My immediate reaction is, wow, are we trusting? You get a shipment of gold, the first thing you do is put it into the kiln and melt it down to see how much is actually there. Well, probably for good reason. Here's another one. Biridiya gets burned again. The 20 minas of gold that were brought here were not all there. When they put it into the kiln, not even 5 minas of gold appeared. The part that did appear on cooling off looked like ashes. Was the gold ever actually identified as gold? Now, in another letter, they cut the Pharaoh slack. And he says, I'm pretty sure that you sent me real gold, but someone along the way swapped it out and gave me something else. Now, you know for sure the Pharaoh was doing the thing, right? I think, isn't there the meme on the internet about the bad copper much earlier? Yeah, we need to get bad gold into the meme as well there. So there were problems with the shipments there, and that's where I really want to see what some of the missing letters had to say, because I want to know how this was resolved, right? Because at the moment we don't know. Okay, now the one thing that I and my late wife Diane Harris Cline did was to do a social network analysis, and we put all of these, we input all of the names from the tablets and the pairs, so-and-so knew so-and-so, so-and-so knew so-and-so. And so we came out, for example, with this sociogram of all the royal letters of which kings knew each other, which messengers were going back and forth. And so we can actually see each of these royal people that I've just been mentioning in this social network analysis. So there's Amenhotep, there's Akhenaten, Tushratta's up there, Biridiya is down there. But we also do have a problem. A number of these tablets are sent to the king of Egypt. It doesn't say Amenhotep III and it doesn't say Akhenaten. It says the king of Egypt. I suspect that the person sending it wasn't actually sure who was king of Egypt at the time. So they're hedging their bets. So one of the things we tried to figure out is who could this possibly be? And we manipulated the database 2 ways. One, we said, okay, what if every time it says the king of Egypt, it's actually Amenhotep III? And then the other time, what if it's actually Akhenaten? So I show you, there's the unnamed king, there's Akhenaten, there's Amenhotep. This is what it looks like if Akhenaten is every time he is the unnamed king. It completely changes absolutely everything. And this is the one thing with social network analysis. It's only as good as the data that you're putting in, and then you get it back out. So we're not going to be able to solve this because it just says the king of Egypt. All right, now the last section, and then we'll wrap up and have time for questions. Just to say that the royal kings, they had it pretty good. The vassal kings, completely different. The vassal kings are like kids squabbling, and they're writing to the Egyptian pharaoh saying, the king of Shechem kicked me. Can you do something about it? I've been attacked. So-and-so bit me. What can you do? I mean, it's just like, 3-year-olds, and the pharaoh are the parents. So let me give you a couple of examples. Using, in part, Biridiya of Megiddo, we've got one letter where he's writing to Amenhotep III, and in each case here I'm showing you the actual tablet. It says, speak to the king, my lord, and my sun god, and you'll recognize that's where the title of the lecture came from. A message from Biridiya, the ruler of Megiddo, loyal servant of the king. I prostrate myself at the feet of the king, my lord, and my sun god, 7 times and 7 times. Look, I've given the request to my king, my lord, 30 large cattle, and then so on. And he ends with, look, the land is peaceful. I'm at war, though, and this is going to continue. Now, we know where the palace is of Biridiya. It's in Stratum 7. We know that thanks to University of Chicago, which excavated it. That is the same palace where the ivories were also found, and the gold hoard, which are prominently featured in the exhibit, and we will come back to this. So another letter from Biridiya. There's actually a total of 6 that we've got that he sent to Egypt. And here again, it starts the same way, traditional beginning. And then he says, basically, look, now I'm plowing, I'm bringing corvée workers here, but the city rulers who are with me are not acting like me, they're not doing the plowing, etc., etc. I alone am only doing all this, so the king, my lord, should care for his city. It's basically, look at me, I'm doing good, you love me, right? Right? And so send me some corvée workers. But there are also problems here. Again, the traditional opening there. And then he says, I'm obeying the commands of the king. So I am guarding Megiddo, the city of the king, my lord, by day and by night. By day I'm guarding from the fields and chariots, and by night I'm guarding the walls of the city. But the hostility of the Habiru is severe in the land. Now, it used to be thought that the Habiru were the Hebrews. That's now fallen out of favor. The Habiru seem to be a social class, if you will, of kind of brigands and robbers and people causing problems there. So here the Habiru are causing him problems. But they're not the only one, because nearby at Shechem, we've got a guy named Labayu, and Labayu has decided to conquer all of Canaan, and starting with Megiddo. And so we get this letter from Biridiya down to the Pharaoh saying that Labayu, this other king, has attacked him. He now intends to capture Megiddo. The king should rescue his city. Labayu has no other intention. He desires to seize Megiddo. The funny thing is, we get a letter from Labayu to the Pharaoh gaslighting him. I'm not doing that. That's not me. It's somebody else named Labayu. It's not me. And he writes to the Pharaoh, he says, look, I'm a servant of the king, like my father. The father of my father was a servant of the king. I'm not a criminal. I'm not derelict. Whatever the king commands, I will obey. Now, we actually know he was causing a problem because the other Canaanite vassals got together and captured him. They captured Labayu, they sent him to Akko, and he was going to be sent back to Egypt for trial. We have this all written in the tablets. But Labayu bribed the king of Akko and was let go. And so while they were trying to recapture him, he accidentally maybe sort of kind of got killed in an ambush. Okay, maybe it wasn't so accidental. But we have the word from Biridiya, who writes to the Egyptian pharaoh and says, oh, by the way, Labayu got killed. I didn't do it. My mare was taken away. That is, my horse was shot out from under me. I stayed behind. By the time I got there, they had already killed him. But Labayu had 2 sons, and they continued having or creating problems. So we can actually see the various cities, the city-states that are involved, even in just those couple of letters. And those names, some of them, are still in use today, and we'll come back to this. So one of the questions that I've got is, if we've got 6 letters from Biridiya in the Amarna archive, where are the responses? There should be an archive at Megiddo. I think there is, and I think I know where it is, because my red box there, that blank where you see it, that was half of Biridiya's palace and what lay beneath it. Because Gordon Loud excavated it, removed it, threw it out, and then kept digging. So whatever was there is gone, but that's where the ivories are from, that's where the gold's from, all that stuff. He did not touch the other half. What you're looking at up top there, I don't know if I can use the power, up top right there, that is the Neo-Assyrian palace, actually 2 of them from Stratum 3. Nobody's ever gone down below that in depth. I think the archive is in the other half of the palace underneath that. So I actually, at one point, a couple of years ago, proposed a plan to move the Neo-Assyrian palaces elsewhere, just like has been done at Hatzor. It didn't get any traction, as you might imagine. So, but at some point, I think we will find Biridiya's archive. All right, let me skim just quickly through the others because I know you want to know just a little bit about them. Abdi-Heba in Jerusalem. Sayce claimed not only did he have Moses and Solomon, but he also had Jerusalem, and third time's the charm, he was right that time. There is Jerusalem in there. He also kind of had advance notice from Winkler and the Germans, but he was right. There is mentions of Jerusalem. In fact, on about 24 different tablets, we've got various things swirling around this king named Abdi-Heba. And he said he wasn't just a king or a governor. He had been put there by the Egyptian pharaoh. He called himself specifically a soldier of the king. And he says that the pharaoh appointed him. But there were problems. At one point, Abdi-Heba says, I'm situated like a ship in the midst of the sea. Everybody is attacking me. Send me people. Send me archers. They're only asking for like a dozen archers. That would have made the difference. But in this particular letter, in Amarna letter 288, he actually says, you can see in the bottom part, he's naming the people in charge of the other towns who are being killed. Right? Somebody's going around assassinating absolutely everybody. And so he's like, you've got to protect me. So he really was worried about himself. Other people causing problems up in Damascus, Biridiya, who says, oh, I'm your errand boy. I'm your guy. And other people are like, not so much. And in fact, Bernaborius, the king of Babylon, says, Biridiya robbed my caravan and killed my men. So do something about it. And then other people, like the king of Kadesh, Etakama, he says, evil Biridiya was defaming me before you. And while he was defaming me, he captured from me all of my estate. So you see what I mean, where they're running to dad and mom and saying, so-and-so is doing this to me, right? It's just like squabbling kids. It's about as far as you can get from the royal letters. I'm not sure I would have wanted to be a vassal king at the time. But again, we can see that the places that are involved are still involved today, Tyre, Beirut, and then up in Amurru in North Syria. And in particular, this one guy that I've mentioned a couple of times, Aziru of Amurru, he's basically trying to conquer all of North Syria. And what it turns out, as he starts attacking the other cities, it's basically a proxy war between the Hittites and the Egyptians. And Aziru is on the side of the Hittites, but it's never stated. So, and it's going to eventually culminate in the Battle of Kadesh between the Hittites and the Egyptians, but that's not going to be till 1279 or 1274. But Aziru is actually kind of sort of in the pay of the Hittites, and that's why he is causing problems. But he's causing problems for people that have problems anyway, like Rib-Hadda of Byblos. If I went through all of Rib-Hadda's letters, we would be here all night. He wrote 60 letters to the Egyptian pharaoh. And I can honestly see them saying, you know, wherever the pharaoh was, you know, day's mail is here, 5 letters from Rib-Hadda. It's like, again, just, you know, toss them. So he keeps writing. He eventually got exiled. His own brother took over Byblos, and he went down to Beirut. But this is when we get everybody else jumping into the pile. So there are lots of spats that are going on. It does not seem to have ever been very peaceful right there. And we get some of the inklings of this. The problem is they're never dated. They're not chronological. We have to figure out the order in which they came. So I tried to do that. One thing that is clear is that after all the shouting was done, that Aziru was called on the carpet by the Egyptian pharaoh. We have very few letters from the Egyptian pharaoh to the vassals. This is the one where he sends it to Azero and basically admonishes him, and eventually in another letter tells him to come to Egypt and basically get put on trial. But when Azero goes back home, he deserts. We actually have a letter in the Hittite archives showing there was a treaty signed between Shuppi-Lulliuma and Azero. And in it, Azero pledged allegiance to the Hittite king and giving him 300 shekels a year of gold. And in the introductory section, I can imagine the glee that Shuppi-Lulliuma said. Azero, king of the land of Amuru, came up from the gate of Egyptian territory and became a vassal of my majesty, king of Hatti, and I rejoiced very much. So you've got these guys being used by the great powers. So can we see all of these people in the social network? The short answer is yes. All right, we've got Biridiya and Labayu there. Abdi-Heba is there. Biridiya is there. Rib-Hadda of Byblos is there. Now, why is this important? Because we can see the main power brokers there. We can see the people that are connecting the network. And we can see if somebody got taken out, killed, whatever, that part of the network might have broken down. And it turns out, of course, you won't be surprised, the messengers and the diplomats are the important threads that hold everything together. So some of these people are mentioned because they're good and important. Others are mentioned because they are troublemakers, like Biridiya. So, and we've got others as well. There's Azero of Amuru. So many of these vassals are still in the news today, right? We still hear about Byblos and Beirut and Sidon and Tyre and Damascus and Akko and Jerusalem. They're still in the newspaper today. So some of the things really have not changed. And in fact, Professor Stephen David at Hopkins back in 2000 said, chariots, infantry, and archers may have been replaced by modern armies and nuclear weapons, but the threat they posed to neighboring states was as intense as exists today. So some things have not changed in that region, I would say. And I would like to end just on one note, namely something I brought up at the beginning. Where's the rest of the archive? The part that they took down to Luxor, because we haven't found that yet. It should be there. And where is everybody else's archive? Ramses II should have had an archive. Ramses III should have had an archive. We haven't found any of those. So where are they? What has happened? It's going to be an accident. We'll find them hopefully eventually. But we also haven't found the archives on the other side. We haven't found in Babylon all of the letters sent to Bernaboriash and the others. We haven't found it in Assyria. Right? The only archive we've got is up with the Hittites and then Ugarit. So I live in perpetual hope that we will find more and be able to flesh all of this out. And I think the Amarna archives are going to turn out to just be the tip of the iceberg, and that we will get lots more information, hopefully while I'm still around. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric, for a wonderful talk. You have given us a lot more to think about on the two aspects, both the discovery of the tablets and also the time period of the Great Kings. So we now like to open it up to question before we move into the galleries. So we will be running the mic around. So if you could please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic so that everybody online can also hear the question.
Thank you very much. I don't know anything about any of this, but how do you know what the letters sound like? So you have a name for a king. How do you know what?
Well, there was a lot of work that went into that. And we have some preeminent Assyriologists and Hittitologists who can talk to you at greater length about that. But there is it's trial and error at first. It turns out that these cuneiform signs, it's not an alphabet, it's like syllabic. You have like a vowel and a consonant, or a consonant and a vowel. And some of them have multiple meanings and signs. So that was always my bane when I was studying Akkadian, was, okay, I can recognize the sign, but which value is it? And it's all in context. So once you learn it, once you know it, then you know it. But you can see actually why somebody like Sayce, trial and error at the same, at the time, you can kind of figure it out. So for instance, the country of Arzawa, it can also be read as Arsapa or Asapi, and that's what he identified it as. He wasn't wrong. Those are the alternate readings for those signs, but today we would rather go with Arzawa. So, right, but we can talk more about that afterward, and some of the specialists here can fill you in there, but good question.
Hello, thank you. My question is going to be, what was your favorite letter that you transcribed?
My favorite letter, well, not that I transcribed, but that I was that I, like way back when I was the one-on-one with Lichty. Oh, that's a good question. I think it would be the letters where the guy said, "Send me gold right away and I'll send you my daughter." And then Amenhotep's like, "What kind of a guy are you?" Right. That one, I'm like, yeah, right. So I think that was probably my favorite at the beginning. Yeah.
Thanks for an interesting talk. You referred to the vassal kings and the pharaohs as sort of like kids, maybe? But is it possible to think also in terms of great powers, especially with what's going on in our world today? And so perhaps the vassal kings were the subordinate powers, and they were jockeying to maintain favor with the big brother, AKA Donald Trump or whatever. So I wonder if you could talk about that as another way of looking at whatever was being described in these letters.
It's certainly possible. You can take these any number of ways you want. And actually, there's a great book. Well, the quote that I just took of Professor Stephen David is a book that came out, and I think it was 2000, called Amarna Diplomacy, which is edited by two Johns Hopkins professors. And they tried to do exactly that. They used the ancient Amarna letters and then modern diplomacy and brought in modern experts to look at them from different ways. And so I think what you've just suggested was looked at either by one guy looking at both ways or two different professors looking at it that way. So it is definitely possible. And I think one of the things that I tried not to do was let the modern world color my interpretation of the ancient world, but of course it's almost impossible, right? And so I was reading these going, wow, things have never changed. So yes, it is quite possible to look at it as you suggest. Yeah.
Two quick questions, and thank you very much. One is, Amenhotep III, did he have, he was still in Karnak, wasn't he? And then before Amarna was built, and so did Akhenaten then bring those archived letters to Amarna of his father? And the second question is, I understand in the archive you would be getting communication to or received from somewhere, and yet you have some of the letters going out. Did Akhenaten or Amenhotep or others copy letters that were going out, and is that why you have it on both directions?
Yeah, excellent questions, both of them. And yes, it must have been that when Akhenaten moved everything up to the new capital city, that he brought the archives that Amenhotep, that were still the open cases that Dad had started, right? Because he's still, so yes, they must have moved that part up, right? And then in terms of, yes, most of these are ones that came in to the pharaohs, but there are some where they're obviously going out. Those must be Xerox copies, right? Carbon. So I didn't even know they had Xerox machines back then, right? But yes, they must have kept duplicates, I would say. And either the duplicates of the original or these are drafts. and we're looking at the drafts, and of course, the final copy went out, but they're like, yeah, you might as well keep your rough draft, just like I keep rough drafts. So it's going to be one of the two. It's either a copy of the final one, or it's going to be a rough draft, right? But either way, but yeah, very good observation. So we have most of them coming in, some going out.
Hi, and thank you so very much. I wanted to know if you had any letters there from Tutankhamun, and those would have been brought obviously back towards Luxor. But we had studied through our docent training about the Amarna letters that went back and forth between Tutankhamun's wife and the Hittites looking for a potential king. And I wondered if that was part of your studies on this.
Yes, so great question, great question. So there is only two at the most, but really one where we think it could be King Tut that's being addressed there. It's a variant of the name. Some people think it's Akhenaten, but some say it could be Tutankhamun or even Smenkhare, but only one out of 350 of them. Right, but what you're referring to, and I was chuckling because I actually had it in my lecture and took it out because the lecture was getting too long. Right, so we have an Egyptian queen, a widow, who tells Shupilululiuma that her husband has died and that he needs to send her one of his sons, and that she will marry him because otherwise there's nobody for her to marry. We're not actually sure who that is, right? It's either King Tut's widow or it's Akhenaten's widow. It could be Nefertiti, right? It's one of the two. That's never been satisfactorily explained, though there actually are recent articles about that too. The upshot is that he didn't believe it at first, and so we get messages back and forth, and then ultimately Shupilululiuma says, yeah, sure, I have a spare son, and he sends a kid named Zananza, who's going to become the king of Egypt, right? We're talking about the same thing here, right? Yeah. And he gets ambushed on the way to Egypt and is killed. And so if it really is King Tut's widow, she eventually has to marry Ai, who is old enough to be her grandfather. You can see why she didn't want to marry him. But that also touched off a war between the Hittites and the Egyptians, right? Because Shup was understandably upset at his spare son being killed, right? The irony is that in that war between the Hittites and the Hittites captured a number of Egyptian prisoners, brought them back, and they had the plague. And Shupilululiuma and most of his family died of the plague in 1344 or something like that. So ironically, that letter from the Egyptian queen led to the death of Shupilululiuma, but tangentially. So, but there's a lot of mysteries still to be solved about that. There's nothing else in the archives about anything like that. And in fact, we're all outside the archive to even know any of this. It's from the Hittite archives and such. But yeah, I had that in at one point. I thought I'm running too long, so I actually earlier today took that out. So I apologize. It would have been fun. But yeah, but it is in the book. It is in the book. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that great talk. I was curious. I think on one of your first slides, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was Minoans and Mycenaeans were mentioned. And I was curious how prominent they were in the letter collection, and if the larger geographical separation brought different conversations than the letters we saw here. Thank you.
So I don't quite know if I get your question, but I can answer tangentially, and hopefully it'll get to you. Of the G8 that I was mentioning, yes, the Mycenaeans and Minoans were there, but you may have noticed I didn't mention them at all, either in the royal letters or the vassal letters. That's because they're not there. There's not a single letter to or from any Minoan or Mycenaean ruler. And for me, as a maximalist who wants the Aegean to be involved in the trading patterns, that bothers me, because we know the Egyptians are in contact with the Aegean at that time. There's Minoan pottery, there's Mycenaean pottery in Egypt. You know, you've got the Aegean list of Amenhotep III mentioning Mycenae and Knossos. So there should be letters in the Amarna archive from them, and there aren't. And for me, that's one of the big mysteries. But that is where I'm going to invoke the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I'm going to argue till my dying breath that in those saddlebags on the donkeys, with the tablets smashing each other to bits, were the one or two that were from the king of Mycenae or the king of Knossos, because I can't imagine that they weren't in contact. I could be wrong, but this is one of the mysteries. But, you know, there are only two in there from the king of Assyria, and there should have been much more. So I think his are all missing as well. So I don't know if that gets to what you were saying, but that's why I was not even mentioning them, unfortunately. But maybe they were in the open cases, and they're going to be found down in Luxor. That's also a possibility. Yeah.
So we have received several questions online, so I do want to give one opportunity for a question to one of those attendees. Do you know why the Mitanni letter was written in Hurrian instead of Akkadian?
Okay, and no, the short answer is no. Right, so what I didn't mention, most of these letters, I said the letters were all in Akkadian. Right, I lied, right. Like 97% of them are in Akkadian. There is one in Hurrian, and there are two in Hittite. All right, the king of Arzawa is writing in Hittite for some unknown reason, and the king of Mitanni is writing in Hurrian, but only in one. So this is Tushratta. Tushratta writes an awful lot of letters, and Hurrian is one of the languages in Mitanni. It's not surprising that he would write in Hurrian, but all of his other letters are written in Akkadian. So why is this one in Hurrian? And for that, we have no explanation. It's not a special letter. It's not something unusual. It just is in Hurrian. But as you can imagine, this threw the original translators for a loop, because once they had figured out, oh, they're all in Akkadian, but they're not, then you have a problem. Right, and so there are some interesting attempts by other people whom I haven't mentioned, like Lieutenant Condor. Condor was one of the guys doing the Western Palestine survey for the Brits. And in fact, the modern border between Israel and Lebanon is because of Condor's survey. Well, he thought he was an expert and published an entire book, which is completely wrong, so I didn't even bother mentioning it. But he probably published 5 articles trying to figure out that Hurrian tablet, right? Even came up with a whole new language system to explain it. So anyway, this is one of the mysteries, I would say. Why is that one in Hurrian? We don't have an answer. I would actually ask, why aren't there more, right? But obviously, the interesting thing is, we've obviously got bilingual and maybe even trilingual scribes, because somebody in Egypt had to be able to read and write Hittite to read and write in the back. Somebody had to be able to read Hurrian to translate that, though it could be that the messenger who brought it was able to translate it. But yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think this is another opportunity to thank our speaker for a wonderful lecture.